Everyone, today we're going to be making a tier list of the best melee in patch 9.2 for raiding. Before we begin, I'd just like to say that if you like the content, please consider subscribing. About 97% of my viewers aren't subscribed, so if you like it, hit the subscribe button, like the video. It shows me a lot of support and really helps me get this content out. Enjoy the video. Alright, so before we start, I just want to say that, of course, if you're not at like the top end of rating, if you're not, pushing as high as you can, then any single spec is viable for everything. You can and should and will complete all content that you want to on any class in the game. What we're doing here is we're going to be doing a tier list for like mythic rating, not like world first stuff, but just kind of how things rank in a vacuum comparatively to each other. But I just want to point out that this tier list shouldn't kind of inform who gets benched, who gets brought to raid. Always bring your best players. Always play what you're the most comfortable with, or you find the most fun. It's a game after all. But if you want to see like what performs better than others comparatively, this is for you. So we're going to go down the list here. We are going to start with Arms Warrior. Now, Arms Warrior, I'm going to put in the B tier. Arms Warrior brings a really unique niche in two-target cleave with sweeping strikes. They bring less single target than a few other classes right now. Their tier set is pretty interesting. Their tier set basically lets you get a high uptime of Colossus Smash, if I am right here. Yeah, so the 2-set, Colossus Smash lasts 2 seconds longer, increases your damage dealt by 5% to those targets. 4-set, Tactician has a 50% increased chance to proc against enemies with Colossus Smash and cause your next overpower to grant 2% strength up to 20%. So you get a lot of strength from it. So their niche in the next raid is kind of like a low target cleave kind of niche. And before Fury gets their 4-piece double legendaries, I do believe they'll be better for DPS. Arms Warriors are pretty tanky. They bring Shout, which is important. They bring Rally, which is always useful. They have alright mobility with jumping and with charge. They have defenses with shield reflect and die by the sword. So overall they're pretty good, but I think they bring less than some of the other specs above them. They're going to be the worst spec, but they're not going to be the best. And that 2-target cleave niche is not super realized in this raid. There's about 1 boss fight, but even on that boss fight, I believe that Fury will be better with 2-piece and 4-piece. So next we have Ass. Ass I'm going to put in A tier. So the reason I'm giving them A tier is that Ass will always kind of be a good raid spec if it's tuned, properly. And Rogues right now are all tuned fairly well. Ass's 2-piece causes Shiv, makes any enemy within 15 yards take 40% increased damage from your poison and bleeds for 9 seconds. I think it's 40%. And then the 4-set Vendetta causes poison and bleeds on your target to expire 100% faster. So this kind of gives them a good cleave scenario with high uptime that doesn't fill the sub. I think realistically in raid you're going to be swapping between Ass and sub on different fights. Ass is really good when you have to be forced away from the boss, or in scenarios where you can have your dots taking a lot of targets at once. Where sub is kind of better in the single target as well as funnel scenarios or in AoE. I think Rogues are fairly unkillable, so they're always going to be a good progression choice because, they have the cheat, they have a bunch of defensives like Feint, they have an immunity and Cloak. But I don't think they're going to be like the best at what they do in a lot of scenarios, but I do think that if you enjoy Ass and you want to kind of switch to something a little easier to learning fights because, they get punished less for downtime, I think Ass will be a good spec. I don't think it'll be the best Rogue spec, but I think it'll be good. Next, Enhancement. Now, Enhancement I am throwing up in A tier, and I think I'm going to give it a really high spot in A tier here, because Enhancement is kind of crazy. So Enhancement, if you guys have seen the sims floating around there, Enhancement has like an 18k single target sim, and this is due to like, one, the buffs they've gotten with their, with Wolves no longer taking up totem slots, which means you can have as many Wolves as you want, as well as them like having conduit buffs. Those changes kind of combine in order to bring a really high kind of single target build with their tier set. So the tier set, the 2-piece spending Maelstrom weapon has a 3% chance per stack to summon a Feral Spirit. So that's whenever you do your 5 Maelstrom weapon ability, that's 50%. And then whenever your Feral Spirits attack, you have a 20% chance to trigger Stormbringer, which resets the cooldown of your Storm Strike. And Storm Strike gives you Maelstrom weapons, so it's a big feedback loop once you have both of those. And combined with Wolf Doctor's Witchbones, one of the legendaries, as well as the Seeds of Rampant Growth that you get from the Night Fae double legendary, you have a really high uptime on Wolves, which leads to a bunch of Storm Strike procs. It leads to a bunch of just kind of crazy things. As well, they have a cleaves niche now because Lava Lash will spread Flame Shock, and they get use out of their new, not the new, but Primal Lava Actuators Legendary, which gives them kind of more of a cleave. Then they can go into Fire Nova, that new talent, if it's needed in bigger AoE. I think generally Enhancement's going to be kind of your single target specialist. You're always going to want one for Wind Fury Totem, but I think this is the first raid where, like, you know, you'd be happy having more than one if you need that single target damage. And I think it's the single target damage is super, like, crazy high that I think it's worth giving it an A. The reason it's not an S is that being forced away from the boss for like too long period of time does move it out of S as well. It's like just single target. They can't do too much outside of it with this kind of 18k sim build. But I think that this is kind of Enhancement's best showing in a long time, and Enhancement's going to be like a welcome melee to see in raids. Next we have Feral. Feral mains. I'm going to give them D. Well, okay. So you could argue C or D for Feral. I'm going to argue a D here, simply due in part to the fact that other specs kind of bring more. So Feral's niche right now is single target. That's basically all they have after Blizzard took them out behind the shed and shot them and killed their tier set. It really was a big over nerf in my opinion. I think it was about like a 65% nerf to their tier set. So the 2-piece Heart of the Lion, each combo point spent reduces the cooldown of Incarn or Berserk by 0.5 seconds. This includes Night Fae, stuff you cast with Night Fae, Convoke. And the 4-set Sickle the Lion, entering Berserk causes you to strike only by enemies, putting a bleed on them over 10 seconds, and it deals reduced damage on 8 targets. So originally this was uncapped, and I think it was like 700% attack power. It's like 320% attack power now. So a big nerf, and that was where a lot of their damage came from, and they got nerfed down to like 2% of their damage instead of like 40 or something. But I think what's really holding Feral back this tier is just their all they can do is single target, and even when they're doing that, other classes bring better single target, like Enhancement or like Fury Warrior or stuff like that. And they don't bring enough unique utility to the raid to kind of bump them up out of the D tier, and they don't bring enough ability to kind of do AoE because they killed their tier set. Rip Feral, I'm really praying for you that you guys get buffs. Feral brings Roar and a Rebirth, but they've given Boomy the ability, and Resto the ability to both do that as well. And Feral doesn't have Innervate, it doesn't have any other unique utility. So unless they give Feral raid utility or they really buff that tier set, I think it's going to stay in D for the foreseeable future. And it really sucks because, you know, I want Feral, I really want the underrepresented specs like Feral, Enhancement, and Survival to get their time to shine. Moving on, we're going to Frost Death Knight. Now, Frost Death Knight I'm going to put in the C tier. The reason for this is basically, I don't know. So, Frost Death Knight is probably the better of the 2 Death Knight specs. But what they bring in this raid with, like, the big burst AoE from Breath or decent single target with their Obliterate build isn't especially needed. So, I don't think Breath will be able to find, like, a niche that's needed in this raid. And they bring worse single target than their options. I think this one I could be the most wrong about. I could see this going B tier or something. But I just think it brings less than what other classes bring. Anyways, so the tier set, if I can pull it up here. 1 second. So the tier set, the 2-piece, Arctic Assault. Remorseless Winter grants 8% critical strike while active. It's boring, but you like crit as Frost. And the 4-piece, Consuming Killing Machine fires a Glacial Advance through your target. So this applies Razor Ice, which means that Frost might be able to move away from having Razor Ice, the enchant on their weapon, and get a second enchant like Hysteria. But I think that their damage is kind of just either not useful enough in its niche in the raid, or kind of in a point where other classes bring it better, that it's lower than other specs. But I think if you're raiding Death Knight, you want to try out Frost this tier. Likewise, I also think that if you want to bring AMZ, you're better to bring it from Blood, specifically because of how like nerfed the DPS AMZs have been after Unholy terrorized the Castle Nathria meta. So I think that for those reasons, that's why I give it a C tier. They're fairly unkillable against magic damage with their defensives. They're really slow, which does hurt, and I think they'll be playing Necrolord, which doesn't it makes them more tanky, but doesn't really help their defensive issue. But I think C tier is fair for them. Next, Fury. That is our first S tier spec. Fury with 4-piece and 2 legendaries is really crazy. So when you get to that point, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be running Necrolord, which is going to be a huge feedback loop with rage generation and with like a big mastery and strength uptime, which leads to really high single target damage and a great ability to cleave with Whirlwind. So the 2-set, Frenzied Destruction, Raging Blow deals 15% increased damage and gains an additional charge. And the 4-piece, Raging Blow, has 20% chance to grant Recklessness for 4 seconds. Excuse me. Now, if you have Reckless Abandon talented, this small Recklessness proc will give you the upgraded forms of Raging Blow and Bloodthirst, which is Crushing Blow and Bloodbath. It won't give you the free 50 Rage, however, which was a change from the PTR. This is still good. You're going to run that talent if you're not Necrolord. Necrolord, you run Anger Management to kind of line up the cooldowns better. But anyways, so Fury brings one of the highest single target damages outside of Enhancement Shaman. They bring Rage Utility in the form of Shout. Both of them, both Battle Cry that gives you the attack power, which I think this is where you're going to get it from, as well as the Health one that gives you all your raid mates the health. They're mobile, they're fast, they're unkillable with they're defensive with enraged regen, with shield block, with bubble because they're going Necrolord. They buff allies with their mastery banner, which is really funny because it's already basically the highest single target simming one, and then you just factor in that you also give other people buffs, and it just gets kind of crazy. I think Fury is just all around an amazing progression spec, an amazing farm spec. They do high damage. They're very unkillable. They have good movement. They bring good utility. I think this is going to be a really good Fury tier. All right, next is my main, Havoc Demon Hunter. For Raid, specifically for Raid, they're going to go in the A tier. Now, the reason for this, before double legendaries, I don't think Havoc deserves a spot in the A tier at all. I think we're kind of B or C. And the reason we're kind of up in A tier is because you need the magic brand. And, Vengeance isn't in the best spot, but once we get 2 legendaries and we get access to Venthyr as a possible covenant, our damage goes up. We gain like a few thousand DPS from double legendaries. The legendary we're going to be going with is still under flux. There was a sim like literally just this morning. I'm recording this on the 24th. There was a sim with Chaos Theory that was simming higher than Dark Glare Boon. But generally in single target, you'll be running Dark Glare Boon. Has a higher ceiling. You can run Collective Anguish and Cleave, where you want to juggle brands on people, and that has it has the same, like, its ceiling is Dark Glare Boon's floor. So if you don't like the RNG, you can run that. But anyways, so I think Havoc brings a really good single target kind of sustained damage niche as well as a cleave. You're gonna love playing Havoc on Pantheon, where you can kind of meta into all 4 targets stacked and just have like 4 or 5 brands up constantly with Collective Anguish. It's going to be kind of a crazy fight for us. But overall, Havoc's very mobile. They're going to bring a really good sustained single target cleave niche with Venthyr once that's unlocked. They're incredibly hard to kill with their defensives. They bring raid utility, quote unquote, in the form of darkness, which is the defensive. They're just all around one of the better melee progression specs. I think in farm you're going to lose a little bit of value once, because you're kind of going to hit the cap of, you can only extend Sinful Brand so much. But I think they're going to be just kind of a really good spec for raid. Next, Outlaw. I'm going to give Outlaw a C tier ranking. I think out of the rogue specs is probably the worst. The fact that it's not capped really hurts it in just everything, because that would be its niche, uncapped Blade Fury hitting everything. Their tier set brings some interesting gameplay elements, not like damage wise per se, but basically your two-piece makes your mastery have a 25% chance to fire a pistol shot. And then your 4-piece is whenever you fire a pistol shot, you load a bullet from your sleeves up to 6 times. And after you load 6, your next pistol shot also fires between the eyes at 6 combo points. So it's kind of this proc-based gameplay that you're used to in like sub or something, where you can get more combo points back. So it brings that kind of interesting loop. But I don't think it really has enough like single target or cleave or really like utility to kind of earn it a spot above other options. It's unkillable, so it has that, but also are the other rogue specs. So I think C is kind of a fair slot to put it. It just kind of doesn't bring enough for the raid. I'm putting it above Feral just because Feral got brutally murdered by the Blizzard development team. But you could argue that Outlaw and Feral should be on the same tier as well. Next, Ret Paladin. My boy Ret Paladin is going to give B tier. I think it's worse than Arms, but I think B tier is kind of roughly where it would sit. They bring really good single target damage in with the execution sentence, which I don't think you're actually going to run, but they do bring really good single target damage with Zeal, with their auto attack resets. Their tier set is boring. Let me pull that up. So they're 2-piece. Whenever you benefit from Art of War, you gain Seraphim for 3 seconds. And then their 4-piece. Art of War has a 50% chance to reset Wake of Ashes instead of Blade of Justice. So with all the auto attack benefits you can get from Wind Fury Totem and with Zeal, you're going to end up getting a fair bit of procs with this. I think you have like 70-80% uptime of Seraphim, and you can get a few Wake of Ashes procs, which would be good, like burst AoE whenever that happens. The issue, it's kind of random, it's kind of boring, but it's fairly powerful, and they will bring good single target damage. Especially with Kyrian. Kyrian's also just really fun to play. Pushing Divine Toll is a really fun button. They have really good survivability with the form of like healing hands. They can lay on hands themselves. They can bubble. They have a good defensive that also brings damage. They also have really good utility. You need the 3% aura that reduces damage if you're serious about raiding. They bring sack, they bring freedom, they bring bop. So those are all just really good. They're fairly mobile because of how much the conduit has scaled that lets them increase horse length. But outside of horse, they're fairly immobile. But overall, they're fairly unkillable. They bring good single target damage. I don't think their damage is like insane compared to the stuff above them, and they don't scale super well into AoE using the single target build. But I think that the fixes to the tier set that they made will solidifies in B spot. Their damage could go up. Their tier set's kind of boring. That could get changed. But I think B is fair for them. All right, Sub. So Sub is going to be our other S tier spec. I think it's worse than Fury Warrior, but I think it's really good. Sub brings really high single target damage, which is quite important. And it also brings really good AoE and funnel, which on the fights where that exists, which are a few fights in the raid, it's going to be really important and really valuable to you because it's going to be like a really good kind of damage profile. Sub is unkillable, just like all rogue specs. And their tier set kind of brings some interesting gameplay. So the 2-piece, Shadow Strike has a 50% chance to grant Shadow Blades for 5 seconds. That's their main cooldown. And your finishing moves have a 3% chance per combo point to cast Shadow Strike at up to 5 enemies within 15 yards. So this can kind of give you the ability to just kind of finishing move back to back to back to back. If that happens, if you have enough targets up, which there are certain fights where you will get enough targets up. I think you're gonna want to play a rogue if you like rogue, if you like that kind of gameplay. I think Rogue or Fury Warrior are probably the best two bets if you're kind of looking to choose a main for raid progression. I think they're both going to be good. I think they bring good damage. I think Rogue's unkillable. I've already said it multiple times. Damage profile is useful. No utility, but I think it's good enough that it deserves an S tier. Survival. I love Survival. It's one of my pet specs. I'm going to give it B. Survival's tier set is literally the thing that's enabling them to be good at all. So there's a bunch of bugs in it, so we don't know how things are going to end up. But there's 4 pieces like a 60% damage gain or something. Their single target is mediocre, but their AoE is perhaps their burst AoE is perhaps like the best out of any melee. And we'll talk more about this when I go into the M+ tier list for melee. But Serve basically brings kind of just huge uncapped bombs. That'll be really good on certain fights. Single target's all right. They have an immunity, which is important. But outside of that, they're a little squishy. They bring a lust, but you'll probably have a lust by like from mages or shamans or something. But I just think that they're kind of niche with the AoE ability. It will give them kind of a B. Single target's lackluster. AoE is great. So I think you kind of average those out and you can get B. The reason I'm giving them B, and I'll give Windwalker a different ranking, you'll see, is that I think that Serve brings kind of a more consistent damage profile that's better than Windwalker's. Windwalker, I guess I'm burying the lead a little bit here. We'll talk about this in the Windwalker section. But I think B is good for Serve. I like Serve. I'm excited for them. Sorry, their tier set. So kill command resets. You have a 40% chance to make your next bomb incur no cooldown. This is bugged to kind of, instead of reset the cooldown, give you the full cooldown of a bomb. So bomb is an 18-second cooldown baseline, but it's hasted. But the bug right now is that when you get this reset, it'll give you 18 seconds back, even if your bomb, let's say, has a 15-second cooldown from haste, which gives you like a bomb and a bit. Blizzard said they're going to fix this, though. And then the 4th set, your Wildfire bombs do 30% additional damage, and it's increased to 80% for those empowered by the 2-piece. This is bugged. Dots. So it was bugged originally to not affect the dots from Wildfire Infusion, which you will be taking. But it like triple dipped on the initial explosion. That got fixed. But now the initial explosion fades really quickly. So like after 1 or 2 events, if things aren't stacked. And it's also just not working for the blue bomb, the serrated one. So hopefully these things get fixed. But I'm really high on Serve. I think Serve is going to be super fun if you want to like alt it or main it. We're going to do Windwalker next. I kind of buried the lead on it. I'm going to give Windwalker C tier. The reason I'm giving them C is that they're kind of the big AoE specialist that they've come to be known for in this expansion, which has, you know, benefits and negatives. Their tier set is nothing fancy, I would say. The 4-piece increases Fist of Fury damage by 40%. Which leads to a higher single target increase and a slight AoE increase, but you mainly want to just push Spinning Crane and AoE. Excuse me. And then the 4 pieces after 10 abilities, offensive abilities. Your next 3 offensive abilities deal 22% additional damage. You don't really want to play around this. You just kind of want to let it rip, and you'll end up getting about as much benefit as you would otherwise. Anyway, so the reason I'm putting them in C and I put Survival in B, even though I think they bring fairly similar combat niches, is that Windwalkers is much more AoE focused and larger targets, and they bring a lot less single target. There's also a little burstier on a minute or 2 minute. I think if there are ads that come up on those like minute or 2 minute kind of intervals, Windwalker will be incredibly valuable. I don't think there's a lot of that in this raid, which is part of the reason why I gave Serve B. But I think that Windwalker just in general, the burstier, larger targets is going to be less impactful than Serve's more consistent bombs, especially if Serve's bugs are fixed, and they will bring less than single target. Single target's still very important in raid, so that's why I'm giving them C and I gave Serve B. But you know, Windwalker brings monk debuff. I think it'll be better from Brewmaster. They also are fairly unkillable, which is always useful. So they're not, you know, it's not a bad pick, but you know, I'm gonna give it a C. And then our last one is Unholy. I'm gonna give Unholy C as well. I just don't think Unholy brings anything that's super unique. That is really valuable at all. Their single target is low. Their AoE is low. They have almost no burst. They like ramp to some burst, but they don't have very much. They are unkillable to magic damage, but they have low mobility. AMZ is not very useful from DPS. Their tier set every 5 Clawing Shadows or Scourge Strikes, which burst wounds, apply Soul Reaper, and summons a ghoul from army. And a 4-piece is your minions deal 5% more. Whenever you execute something, the bonus increases 25% for 8 seconds. So they're going into this execute niche. The issue with that I think is a big problem for the execute niche, even though they're kind of tier sets building on that, is I think Fury will just bring better execute if that matters. We haven't seen the last few fights, so if the Jailer is a super execute heavy fight, Fury could, Unholy could rise in the ranking, maybe a tier. But I think that if you want execute, then Fury is just a better option. I also think that since their single target is so low, and since their kind of AoE that matters, their burst AoE is so low, generally, you know, when you're trying to AoE ads, they'll be dead already. I think C tier is justifiable for them. I think that both DPS DKs aren't looking too great this tier. I think Unholy specifically is paying for its sins from Castle Nathria. But, you know, if you want to play Unholy, if you're a big fan of the fantasy, if you like how the tier set looks, you know, go straight ahead. But I think it's worse than options above it. All right, so that is my tier list and rankings for the melee DPS in Raid for this tier. Let me know what you think down below. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you disagree. I will have the M+ video for melee. I'll have Raid for range and M+ for range coming over the next few days. Hopefully trying to get those up for the Raid releases. And then I'm going to have kind of a meta speculation video at the end. So subscribe if those sound interesting to you. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you agree. Like it if you disagree. And just I appreciate everybody watching the content. And thank you.